Welcome to Competition Curious, the blog, vlog, and podcast for business owners and marketers who are curious about running competitions. I am your host, Suki Van Kay. I am the world's first and only dedicated expert, strategist, and complete nerd when it comes to competitions. Now, in the last episode, we talked a little bit about the rules behind tagging and sharing on Facebook and Instagram. So I thought this week it would be useful for me to go through the full rules for Facebook and for Instagram, and also for other platforms such as Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, and LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. So if you're ready to make sure your competition obeys social media competition rules, let's dive in. All right, welcome to this week's episode of Competition Curious. Now, before we go any further and dive into looking at the specific rules for each platform that you may wish to run your competition on, I do just want to start with a little disclaimer. So at the time that this episode is going out, these rules are all correct. But as we have seen in the last episode with Facebook, the rules do change, and they do change often. There have been many changes over the past decade that I have been doing this, and I have no doubt in my mind they will change again. So please bear in mind that at the time this episode goes out, everything is current and up to date. However, if things do change, there is a post which I will link down in the notes for this episode. And that is where I will keep all of the current rules up to date for you. And I do just also want to give you a little tip. If you are ever wanting to find the exact rules for the social media platform that you are running your competition on, all you need to do is go to Google and search for the name of your platform, for example, Facebook, plus contest, because most of the platforms are owned by American companies, rules. So if I was looking for the competition rules for running a competition on Instagram, I would type in Instagram contest rules. And that way, in the search results, you can make sure that you click on the website, so instagram.com/ for Instagram's rules, for example, the actual company's page for those rules, instead of a page on a third-party website where they have just summarized the rules like I have in my link, or are discussing outdated and no longer valid rules. So a tip for you: if you want to find the rules for the platform that you are running your competition on, head to Google and type in the name of your platform, Instagram, contest, because it's American, rules, and you should be able to find the most up-to-date rules there. Okay, let's start with Facebook's rules for running competitions or contests or promotions on their platform. So again, just to find these, I did type in Facebook contest rules, and it brought me to a page called Pages, Groups, and Events. And then I scrolled down until I saw Policies for Pages, Groups, and Events. That's the page I'm currently looking at right now. And the rules for running promotions, for example, they say a contest, giveaway, or sweepstakes. Again, remember, they are American. There is a previous episode of Competition Curious that you can go back to find out the difference between competition, contest, sweepstake, and giveaway, just in case you're curious. Essentially, in Australia, we call all forms of competition a competition. In America, they have a distinction between contest, giveaway, and sweepstake. So if you hear me use these terms interchangeably, it's just because I'm using the terms that the platform has used, or I will default to the umbrella term of competition. So Facebook starts off by saying, and I am reading this directly from their policies page, you must ensure that your promotion complies with applicable legal and regulatory requirements. For example, providing entrance with a copy of the promotion's official rules, disclosing offer terms and eligibility requirements, and registering your promotion with the relevant authorities. So this sounds like a mouthful, but essentially what Facebook is saying is, if you need licenses, make sure you get them, make sure you have a set of T's and C's, and you let people know who is eligible to enter and who is eligible to win. So essentially, get your legal straight is the first part of Facebook's official rules on running competitions on their platform. It then moves on to a section which says, and again, I'm reading this straight from their page, you must also require participants to A, fully release and hold Meta, Facebook's parent company, harmless from liability, and B, acknowledge that the promotion is in no way sponsored, endorsed, administered, or associated with Meta, administered by or associated with Meta. So essentially what this means is Facebook and Meta are covering their butts. So they don't want anything to blow back on them if your competition goes sideways. So the easiest way to both release Facebook and Meta from liability during your competition and also get your participants to acknowledge that Facebook or Meta is not at all involved in your competition is to include these in your terms and conditions. The rules then go on to say your promotion must not require or incentivize participants to share, repost, tag others, or in any other way publicize your promotion. Now, we did cover this in detail in last week's episode of Competition Curious, which we covered. We talked specifically about tagging and sharing in Facebook and Instagram competitions. So we've already dealt with this. We've already unpacked this in the previous episode. So check that out if you do want to go more in depth into the issue of tagging and sharing. But essentially, for the purposes of this episode, what this is saying is you can't ask people to tag and share under the rules of running a competition on Facebook's platform. And finally, a little bit more butt covering from Facebook and Meta. The rules then finish by saying, note that Meta will not assist you in administering a promotion. Should you use our services to administer your promotion, you do so at your own risk. So essentially, you're just acknowledging that if anything goes sideways, Facebook and Meta are not to blame. So Facebook's rules really are pretty simple. Essentially, make sure you have a copy of your terms and conditions, make sure you apply for any required licenses, permits, or authorities, and obey any state or federal countrywide rules for running competitions where you are and where your competition is open to as well. Making sure that you release Meta from liability and acknowledge they're no way involved in your competition. Again, the easiest way to do this is in your T's and C's. And finally, don't ask people to tag and share as part of your competition. So starting with a nice, easy one. Facebook's rules are pretty simple when it comes to running competitions, and you can always check the most up-to-date Facebook rules because, as I say, they do change via the link in the notes below for this episode. Moving on to Instagram, the rules are pretty similar for Instagram as they are to Facebook, with both companies being owned by parent company Meta. However, there are a few differences, so I will just dive into rule by rule like I did for Facebook. Reading directly from Instagram's promotion guidelines page in their help section, Instagram say if you use Instagram to communicate or administer a promotion, example, a contest or sweepstakes, you are responsible for the lawful operation of that promotion, including the official rules, offer terms and eligibility requirements, example, age and residency restrictions, and compliance with applicable rules and regulations governing the promotion and all prizes offered. Example, registration and obtaining necessary regulatory approvals. Essentially, what this means, very similar to Facebook, is that you need to make sure you have a set of T's and C's that set out the eligibility requirements for your participants, and to make sure that you apply for any licenses, permits, or authorities that you may need to run your competition in your state or country, or in the state or countries that your competition is open to. The next part of the rules say that you must not inaccurately tag content or encourage users to inaccurately tag content. Example, don't encourage people to tag themselves in photos if they aren't in the photo. So again, this was covered in detail in the last episode of Competition Curious, which you can pop back to and refresh your memory or dive into if you're specifically interested in running a tag and share competition. But essentially what this means is don't tag people in photos, or don't encourage people to tag themselves in photos if they're not in that photo as part of your competition. As we did cover in the previous episode, if you do want people to tag themselves or friends in the comments or mention people in the comments, as Instagram calls it, this should be okay on the platform, but definitely be sure to check out the previous episode for a little bit more of an in-depth explanation and dive into this kind of murky issue in Instagram's rules. Just like Facebook, Instagram then go on to talk about liability, release, and acknowledgement. So promotions on Instagram must include the following: a complete release of Instagram by each entrant or participant, and acknowledgement that the promotion is in no way sponsored, endorsed, or administered by or associated with Instagram. So this is exactly the same as we just looked at with Facebook. Essentially, The easiest place to do this is in your T's and C's, where you'll have a clause or a condition relating to releasing Instagram from any liability with your competition, and also acknowledging that Instagram plays no part whatsoever in the running of your competition. Again, just like Facebook, Instagram then goes on to say, we will not assist you in the administration of your promotion and cannot advise you on whether consent is required for use of user content or on how to obtain necessary consent. So this is a little bit more specific than Facebook's rules because it does talk about user content. Given the nature of the Instagram platform, if you're asking people, for example, to post photos as part of their entry, it doesn't want you to be going to them. Instagram doesn't want you to be going to them to ask about whether you can then reuse that content. So basically they're saying it's up to you to work out where you live and where your competition's open to, what you can do with that user content. And again, the easiest place to specify this and to clarify this for your audience would be in your terms and conditions. And finally, to round off Instagram's rules, they state that you agree that if you use our service to administer your promotion, you do so at your own risk. Exactly the same as Facebook. They're covering their butts legally and saying that if you run a competition on their platform, it's entirely on you. They take no responsibility and they won't step in with any form of involvement. So very similar rules to Facebook. They do mention a few very specific things, such as tagging people in photos they're not in, or what you can do with that content as part of the entry for your competition. But essentially, make sure you have T's and C's, make sure you apply for permits, make sure you include that liability release in those T's and C's, and don't expect Instagram to help you with the competition. And make sure you do, above all else, put that clause in there for releasing them for liability and say that they have no part to play in the running of your competition, just like we looked at with Facebook. All right, let's take a look at Twitter's rules for running contests and competitions on their platform now. So again, to find these rules, all I did was Google Twitter contest rules, and you can do this at any time to make sure you've got the most up-to-date rules for running a competition on Twitter. And I know that at least here in Australia, Twitter isn't a super popular platform, especially for running competitions. However, there are a few really important points to note in here, and a couple of those points are actually really good points for sort of how to run a good competition in the first place, which apply to all platforms. So I do just want to dive into it. They are a lot longer than Facebook and Instagram's rules if you're after some light bedtime reading. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to pull out the main rules that you need to be aware of for Twitter and explain a couple of things about those rules that make them a really good guideline for running competitions in general. All right, so under Twitter's guidelines for promotions on Twitter, their first rule is to discourage the creation of multiple accounts. And specifically under this, they say, please be sure to include a rule stating that anyone found to use multiple accounts to enter will be ineligible. So it is a good idea to include this. As I say, from a best practice point of view, you don't want to be encouraging your entrants to create multiple accounts to enter your competition more than once. At the end of the day, it doesn't help you because you're still only attracting one human being who might use your products or services or purchase from you. And it's also going to highlight to the social media platform that you're running your competition on that you're not exactly following their best practices and encouraging their users to interact in a desirable way with that platform. So definitely don't encourage people to create multiple accounts in order to get multiple entries. In a similar vein, the next rule for running competitions on Twitter is discourage posting the same tweet repeatedly. It then goes on to say, posting duplicate or near duplicate updates or links is a violation of the Twitter rules and jeopardizes search quality. Please don't set rules to encourage lots of duplicate updates. For example, whoever retweets this the most wins. Your contest or sweepstakes could cause people to automatically be filtered out of Twitter search. We recommend setting clear contest rules stating that multiple entries in a single day will not be accepted. So in a similar vein to the previous rule, essentially what this is saying is don't encourage people to enter your competition by creating heaps of duplicate content because it's going to be bad for the platform, it's going to be bad for the user, it's going to be bad for you, and essentially it could end up getting your account or their account suspended. The next two rules are essentially Twitter's advice to you to run a good competition on their platform. So, the first of those two are ask people to mention you in their updates so you can see all the entries. When it comes to picking a winner, you'll want to see all the contestants. If the updates mention you, you'll be able to see all the updates in your notifications timeline. Simply running a public search may not show every single update, and some contestants may be filtered out from search for quality. So if you ask people to mention you in their tweet or their retweet or whatever it is that you're asking them to do to get an entry into your competition, it means that you'll have a collection of those entries in your notification center, and it's going to make picking a winner a whole lot easier for you. The second of these sort of best practice rules that Twitter has in their guidelines for competitions on the platform is encourage the use of topics relevant to the contest. It then goes on to say, you might decide to have people include relevant hashtag topics along with the updates, for example, hashtag contest or hashtag your company name. Keep in mind that the hashtag topics need to be relevant to the update. Encouraging people to add your hashtag to totally unrelated updates might cause them to violate the Twitter rules. So again, it's going to help you to find posts. It's going to help other people to find your competition, your business, and your posts, but just make sure that the hashtags you use are relevant. They have given the example of hashtag contest. I wouldn't personally recommend this, specifically because every other contest out there that is tagged with hashtag contest is also going to appear when you search for that tag. And they also have hashtag your company name, which could be useful. Obviously, your company name is unique. You can also use hashtag your competition name as well. The next rule is to follow Twitter rules. So this just means instead of just following the competition rules or the contest rules for Twitter, make sure that you also abide by Twitter's rules in general for using the platform. Make sure your entrants do too. And Twitter's final rule for running competitions on their platform is applicable laws and regulations. So they say, before starting any contests or sweepstakes, please ensure that they comply with all applicable laws and regulations. Compliance with such laws and regulations is your responsibility. Please consult with an attorney if you have questions about legal compliance. This is good advice in general. You should always be, consulting with someone who actually knows the law in the country or state where you are or where your competition's open to, but also just to make sure that you have those T's and C's, you have those licenses and anything else that may apply to your competition where you are. All right, so that covers us for running competitions on the Twitter platform. Let's move on to Pinterest, which is, again, one of those lesser used platforms, at least here in Australia, for running competitions. However, I do still want to cover it in the interest of being comprehensive for this episode. So Pinterest's community policy includes a section called Contest Guidelines, and that states, don't require people to save a specific image. Give people the ability to choose pins based on their tastes and preferences, even if it's from a selection or a given website. So, for example, don't ask people to pin or save to Pinterest one specific image in order to enter your competition. You could, for example, have a range of your products on a page on your website, and you can ask people to pin their favorite image or product or create a mood board using a specific image or product, for example. And again, this is very similar to Twitter, where Pinterest essentially don't want you to create a competition where you've got all of your entrants just posting duplicate or completely exactly the same clone content to the platform, because it's just going to result in a really bad search experience for people when they search a specific image or a specific term or your business, and they're just presented with 25,000 of the exact same image. So be sure to give people a choice if you're asking them to pin or save a specific image. Next is a very important one to mention if you are going to run a competition on Pinterest, and that is don't allow more than one entry per person. So this is quite interesting because this isn't something that we've seen so far with any of the other platforms. And it is also something that is a variable that you can use in competitions in order to gain multiple entries or a depth of entries or give your users choice about how many times they want to enter. So if you're running your competition on the Pinterest platform, you must be careful to only offer people one entry, or only to give people one entry into the competition, even if they do enter multiple times. So obviously this is going to impact you. If you are collecting your entries, you will need to make sure that each of those entrants have only entered once and they have one entry in the list in order to make it fair for everyone and comply with Pinterest rules. The next rule for running competitions on Pinterest is very similar to what we saw with Facebook and Instagram, and that is don't suggest that Pinterest sponsors or endorses you or the promotion. So essentially, again, you'll want to cover this in your terms and conditions. You'll also just want to be careful about how you promote your competition and what kind of promotional marketing material you use, just to make sure that nothing you include in that could imply that Pinterest is in any way involved in your competition. Pinterest do also say, do review our brand guidelines for general rules about using the Pinterest brand. So just like we saw with Twitter, making sure that you obey the rules in general for using the platform, this is a specific rule that says, make sure you know how to reference our brand and how to make sure that you comply legally with our brand guidelines. So essentially, this isn't sort of including Pinterest logo on things to imply that they endorse the competition, or also the way that you use the Pinterest name in your marketing material for your competition. And Pinterest competition rules round out by saying, lastly, be sure to follow all relevant laws and regulations. So this is something we've seen in Facebook's rules, Instagram's rules, Twitter's rules, and now Pinterest rules. So make sure if you're running a competition that you do abide by all laws and regulations where you are, but also where your competition is open to as well. Okay, moving on to YouTube. This is a long set of rules for running competitions on YouTube. So I'm just going to pick out the sort of most important ones to be aware of, and you will also find the links to all of these rules and to YouTube's rules as well in the link in the notes. So if you want to read them in full, make sure you do check that out. All right, so YouTube's contest policies and guidelines start out by saying, YouTube does not allow contests to be run through ad units, ads on the platform. If the contest conforms with the below rules, you can use contests through your content on the platform. So this is an important point. You can't use YouTube just to advertise your competition and encourage entries, but you can use the platform to encourage people to create content to enter your competition, or you can create organic content, not paid ad content, to promote your competition on the platform. YouTube's rules are divided into two different sections: general restrictions and requirements, and your official contest rules. So essentially, YouTube's rules for running a competition on their platform and what your rules or terms and conditions should include in order to be compliant with running a competition on the YouTube platform. YouTube's general rules start out by saying, you're solely responsible for your contest. Your contest on YouTube must comply with relevant federal, state, and local laws, rules, and regulations, including US sanctions, and your contest cannot infringe upon or encourage the infringement of any third-party rights or the participation in unlawful activity. So essentially, they're covering their butts legally, and they're saying you need to cover your butt legally as well by not asking people to do things that are essentially against the law, and making sure that your competition complies with those laws as well. Interestingly, the next rule for running competitions on YouTube states, you cannot ask the viewer to give all rights for or transfer the ownership of their entry to you. So this is something that with other competitions, for example, a submit your photo on Instagram competition, this is something where previously we have included in our T's and C's that that entry then becomes yours to use for marketing purposes. YouTube specifically states that you can't ask them to hand over their rights. Now, the rule does say you cannot ask the viewer to give all rights for or transfer ownership of their entry to you. You may need to enter into a separate agreement with those entrants if you do want to use their videos or their content for your marketing. So just do be aware of that one with YouTube. The next rule, again, to me is very interesting. It states your contest must be free of charge to enter, in brackets. Don't forget to check your local lottery laws. So there's kind of two rules here for me. First of all, that it must be free of charge to enter. This is something we have discussed before in previous episodes and is something I do go into at length on the blog as well. But essentially, you cannot charge people to enter your competition. That would be an illegal competition. So YouTube is reiterating that in order to enter this competition, you cannot take any money from your entrants or your participants to enter the competition. But then they also put in the same rule, for some reason, they lump it together. Don't forget to check your local lottery laws. So essentially, they're sort of alluding to the fact that charging for entry is illegal in most countries and states around the world, but also as a reminder, just to check those laws in general. So essentially they're saying obey laws, just like Facebook, Instagram, and all the other platforms have said as well. Next, YouTube says that you can't manipulate statistics. So essentially you can't make it look like a video has had more views than it has had, or a channel has more followers than it actually has. So you can't kind of use underhanded ways or encourage people to use underhanded ways to look more popular or misrepresent the stats than they actually are. So the kind of context I can see this becoming relevant to is if you ask your entrants to enter via submitting a video and uploading it to YouTube, and then the video with the most votes wins, for example, as part of that process, you can't facilitate or encourage, or as a consequence, make it so that your entrants are essentially paying for followers or using bots to like their videos, or doing anything that's basically going to skew the authenticity and the truth of the stats on YouTube. So running a video with the most likes wins competition, for example, could potentially end up encouraging that kind of behavior. So you may instead want to run a competition, for example, a game of skill. Again, we have covered games of skill and games of chance on this Competition Curious before, so if you want to go back and check out that episode, you can. But a game of skill is essentially judging your entries and your entrants based on the skill they show. So you could ask them to upload a video to YouTube showing some kind of skill or submitting some kind of entry that way. And instead of choosing from the most popular video or the one who gets the most likes or has the most subscribers, you choose your favorite video that best meets your entry requirements. And to round out section 1 of YouTube's rules, we have you cannot associate or affiliate YouTube with your contest without YouTube's prior written consent. This rule prohibits, among other examples, expressly stating or doing anything that suggests that YouTube is involved with or has endorsed your contest in any way. So this is pretty similar to all of the other platforms we've looked at so far. Essentially, you can't imply in any way that YouTube is involved in your competition. The second part of YouTube's competition rules for running competitions on their platform essentially cover all of the things you need to have in your rules or your T's and C's in order to be compliant with their competition rules. So number 1 states you must have a set of official rules, which A, includes links to the YouTube community guidelines and indicate entries that don't comply will be disqualified. B, state all disclosures required by all applicable federal, state, and local laws, rules, and regulations, including US sanctions. And C, are wholly compliant and consistent with the YouTube terms of service. So essentially, include a link to their community guidelines. Make sure that people who don't comply by these community guidelines know that they will be disqualified. Make sure you apply for any rules or licenses or permits or authorities where you are, and include any requirements from those laws in your T's and C's. And also make sure that everyone complies with the terms of service as well. The next rule states your contest must be conducted and all prizes awarded as outlined in your official rules. So essentially this means if you tell people you're going to run a competition, you have to actually run that competition, and you have to actually give those prizes away as well. And this again is one of those rules, like we saw with Twitter, that is generally good practice for running a competition. If you say you're going to run a competition, make sure you run it. if you advertise those prizes, make sure you actually do give those prizes away. The final 3 rules for running competitions on YouTube essentially cover YouTube's butt. So these are: you're responsible for your rules and all aspects of your contest administration. This is something we've seen with the other platforms as well. Your rules must clearly state that YouTube is not a sponsor of your contest and require viewers to release YouTube from any liability related to your contest. Again, this is something that we've seen with the other platforms and is easiest to include in your T's and C's. And finally, you must include a legally compliant privacy notice in your official rules. This notice explains how you'll use any personal data you collect for the contest and adhere to that use. Now, this is another good general practice one as well. So essentially, the best place to do this again is in your T's and C's. Are you noticing a theme here? In your T's and C's, have a condition there that explains how you operate with regards to your privacy policy, a link to your privacy policy, and also state what you will then do with that data. So this means that you comply, your competition and your business complies with the privacy rules where you are, and also covers YouTube and obeys YouTube's rules when it comes to mentioning privacy in your terms and conditions as well. Okay, so that's YouTube's dry, boring, and long rules out of the way. Let's move on to LinkedIn, which for me at least is a little bit more entertaining and thankfully for you is a lot shorter. So under LinkedIn's professional community policies, this is where you will find the rules around running competitions on their platform. So one of their policies is that they want you to create safe conversations on LinkedIn. And under this, they say, do not promote, sell, or attempt to purchase illegal or dangerous goods or services. And then after some examples of illegal services, they then say, you may not use LinkedIn to hold lotteries, contests, sweepstakes, or giveaways. Now, let me just make this 100% clear. Competitions are not illegal, and they are 100% definitely okay for you to be running. LinkedIn just doesn't permit them on their platform. Now, what I find really entertaining about this is when you click on there, learn more about our illegal and inappropriate commercial activity policy. When you click on this link, you are presented with a long bullet point list of examples of illegal activities. Now, some of these 100% are illegal, completely agree they shouldn't be allowed on the platform. For example, selling live animals, selling human fluids or body parts or organs or firearms or weapons or drugs. I completely understand that. But lumped in with these things is sweepstakes, giveaways, lotteries, and contests. So that's a direct quote from their illegal, dangerous, and inappropriate commercial activity policy. I do find this a little bit extreme if I'm 100% honest, but you know, LinkedIn is free to do what LinkedIn is free to do. And if they don't want you to run competitions on their platform, then that is perfectly fine. So to summarize, basically, LinkedIn really hate competitions. Definitely don't run your competition on the LinkedIn platform. And to be 100% honest with you, LinkedIn is not a great platform to run your competition on anyway. Before these rules changed, I did have a client who insisted on running a competition on LinkedIn. We did get some good results, but it was really like pushing a stone up a hill and having that stone fall back on you. It was so difficult to get traction because of the nature of what people use the LinkedIn platform for. It was difficult to get quality entries. We were running a game of skill, and as we've seen in previous episodes, games of skill get far fewer entries than games of chance anyway. And it was just so expensive to advertise on the platform against other platforms like Facebook and Instagram. So to be 100% honest with you, it's not exactly a huge loss for me or for you that you can't run a competition on the LinkedIn platform. Which brings us to our final platform, TikTok. Now, TikTok is the relative new kid on the block compared to the other platforms. And I have been asked about rules for running competitions on the platform before, and I've actually never been able to find anything conclusive saying yes or no, or even any specific section in their policies like the other channels have for running competitions on the platform. So what I did is I went to their community guidelines section and I read through a lot of rules about using the platform in general and found the only one reference to running contests on the platform. And that is to say that under the allowed section is showing or describing competitive eating contests such as hot dog or pie eating contests. So the good news is if you're planning to run a hot dog eating contest or pie eating contest on the TikTok platform, you are totally permitted. For everyone else who wants to run any other kind of competition, it's completely uncertain as to whether it's permitted or not. Now, it's not specifically excluded in their rules and it's not specifically illegal as per LinkedIn's rules, but it isn't specifically stated that they are permitted, or there are no conditions surrounding using the platform to run competitions either. So I would say that it's totally fine to run competitions on the TikTok platform. I would just be careful to make sure that you abide by all of their other community guidelines. It is a long list, but it's very quick to skim through. And also just make sure that you use the other rules for the other platforms we've discussed in this episode as a bit of a guide or a best practice. So essentially make sure that you've got your legals in place, make sure that you don't imply that you're connected to TikTok in any way or your competition's connected to TikTok in any way. Get people to release TikTok from liability in your T's and C's. And also just make sure that you apply for any of those licenses or permits that you may need as well. That brings us to the end of this week's episode on the rules for running competitions on various social media platforms. So to summarize it all and package it all up with a nice neat little bow, make sure you have a set of terms and conditions, and those terms and conditions cover eligibility requirements and any other things that are stated specifically in that platform's rules that you must include in your T's and C's. Make sure you abide by any rules and regulations for where you are and where your competition is running. And that includes applying for any permits, licenses, or authorities. And also make sure that you include a liability release for the platform in question, and also acknowledge that they're not involved in any way in your competition. And finally, just make sure that you abide by any terms or guidelines or policies or rules for actually using the platform in general. If you have enjoyed this week's episode of Competition Curious, I would absolutely love it if you could share it with your business owner and marketing friends. Please do subscribe and follow so you can find out when the next episode is released. They are released every week on a Monday. And also, please be sure to rate and review if you haven't already. I do really personally appreciate it. And of course, join me for the next episode of Competition Curious. Until then, I'm Suki Bankay, and I will see you next week.